roles that the CSS are playing. Yeah. So apart from actually introducing the CSS, let's look at maybe the advanced options. Like we can't really talk about creating a particular website or web page for that matter without introducing the concept of box model. Now, box model is a situation whereby you need to, like for example, you need to size up at the various spaces that the HTML elements occupy. Like for example, if you have a tag or a HTML element such as paragraph, yeah, normally they occupy a particular box, literally, yeah. So by default, whether you see them or not, they always have some kind of borders and some margins around them, yeah. Now, to make those particular HTML tags be proportional to the entire website page, that's why it's important to actually bring on board the concept of the box model so that you can understand how we can always nest the various HTML elements and make them actually properly arranged or properly appear within the website page. So when we talk about the box model, as I've mentioned, so this ensures that you can always arrange the spaces around the various HTML elements. Now, when we talk about the spaces, we need to look at the borders around these particular HTML elements. And also we need to look at maybe the padding. The padding is actually the space that a particular text occupies within the box, right? We can also look at the margin, right? So as you build a new page, you can arrange these boxes on the screen, yeah, so that you create a balanced layout, yeah, so that one element doesn't maybe move towards the left side and the other one towards the right side. Yeah. Now, at some point, someone will ask you, how comes your web page is not properly arranged? Some elements are hanging. So that means you haven't really implemented the right box model. It's important actually to ensure that we can always have it. Now, when I talk about the box model, we have these components, the margin. So each and every element, take note of that, whether you see these or not. Yeah, they're normally surrounded with these main borders or box. So each and every element has a margin, has a border, it has a padding. Though the padding now you have to create them. These are components, you are the ones to adjust them so that these they appear well, right? So you also have your content. So the content is actually whether the image, the text, and so on. So to help us adjust, now this is where the concept comes in of the division. So to help us adjust the padding around the content, the border around the content, and the margin, we need to have the division element, or what we normally refer to as the div element. Yeah. So div allows us to specify the height, the way, the width, right, of these particular components, right? So when we talk about div, these are particular elements that groups elements within our website through setting of the various width and height attributes. So this is another element or tag that you can always associate our various elements with. Like for example, it has also the opening and the closing tags, as you can see, right? So by using multiple of these div elements as building blocks, you can design an entire web page layout. Now, maybe to take you fast forward, if you have looked at maybe how the CMS or the content management system are actually created so that you can always use them, they use this concept of div or the CSS box model. Yeah, that's why you can always have CMS that has already established footer. It has already established maybe the sidebars, and so on. Yeah, so this is courtesy of this kind of div tags. So again, this is an example of a div element, how that it has been implemented. So you need to recall, that's why we started by looking at the various CSS style categories. Remember the IDs and the class. Yeah. So this is what we have. Classes we identified by the period. So take note of the, like for example, there's a content here on the right side. Yeah, you can see this is a box by 20 by 20 pixel. So there's no space. Yeah, take note of the border. Yeah, so this border, it's not automatically there. Yeah, so we can always specify the border around the content. We can specify the padding around the content. We can specify the margin as we had seen in our respective model. Right. So we need to look at how we can use the div element to adjust the space so that this particular text doesn't really go and maybe get attached to the border. And also the space around this kind of text should actually have the right margin. So for us to achieve this, we need to specify the padding as shown. So you can say the padding has been specified, right? So we have the 10 pixel. So you can see there's a space. Now the space within the border, yeah, that is the padding, the space that actually is surrounding the text. Yeah, the blue text that is within the border, that is the padding. Padding allows you to create space. Yeah, that actually gives a room for your text and the border. And also we have the margin, which is actually 10 pixels. Now margin is now outside the border, the space outside the border. As you can see, this is before the box. You can see there's a space. So that is the border. So let's examine closely on what is happening. You can see there's a clear presentation here of how padding and margin is actually implemented. Yeah, you can see the margin, both the height and the width, it's outside the border, as you can see dotted red lines, right? And also we have the dotted green lines, which are specifying the padding element or the padding effect. Yeah, so it's very important for us to understand how we can use this particular div tags to properly execute or arrange these margins, paddings within our spacing. Now, I know you have been wondering, how do we always calculate the height or the width of this particular, maybe an image or a particular margin of content and so on. So this is how the dimension, the total dimension is normally implemented. Might not make sense, but with time, you will know what really happens behind the scene. Like maybe calculating this particular width and height, we have the width, which is 242 pixels. I think it's a square. Also, the height and the width is 242 pixels, right? So to have the dimensions, like the total element width, you must specify the defined width. So the defined width in our case is the 200 pixels, and for the left padding is the 10 pixels, right? Of course, the right padding also is 10 pixels, and the dimension for the left and the right border is 1 pixel each. And then you also have the margin and the bottom, the top and the bottom, the right and the left margin also 10 pixels, 10 pixels each. So if you total, they give us the 242 pixels, that is width, right? So that's how we actually illustrate the total space that a particular content occupies. So before you say that this, because there's the original dimensions, the original dimension of that particular image is what 200. Yeah, that is the original dimension of what the content occupies. But once we add these other dimensions, such as for the padding, the margin, the space, or actually the width and the height kind of reduces. So take note of that, because maybe sometimes when you look at the size of the total image when it's within the website, it's going to give you a particular dimension. But once you have downloaded it, you ask yourself, but I think it was 1,000 by maybe by 700 pixel, right? How comes I've downloaded it and it's only 300 by 200? Yeah. So chances are the website took all the entire dimension that this particular content actually had. So to execute the individual, like for example, if you want to set the individual margins, yeah. So here is where you can always have the margin top, yeah. So you start introducing other kind of properties. Remember the structure of a CSS. We had the selector, property, value, right? So as you integrate or bring on board these concepts of the padding and the margins, also we need to take note of that particular structure. If you have now familiarized yourself with the top properties, so and you want to go down and to utilize the short form method of actually coming up with these particular margins and paddings, we can use these specifications shown down there. Now I'll give you a particular way that you can always maybe incorporate all these top, right, bottom, left at a go, yeah, without really breaking them down, as you can see. So for the 10 pixel, that is top, yeah, sets all 4 margins, yeah, around. We also have 10, 5 says the top and the bottom margins. So the top and also the left and the right margins. We also have the margin. The bottom says the top 20 pixel, right margin, and 10 pixel, the bottom margin, and 20 pixel. But the concept you need to understand is actually how these particular paddings and the margins are represented. Yeah. So once you have done that, you can always specify the respective dimensions or measurements without losing track. I think for the padding, also you just have to replace the margin with the padding one. So you have padding top, padding right, padding bottom, and the same scenario appears. Yeah. So at some point, you'll get some programmers or designers who have already gotten used to how to specify the top right. So they don't really need to write that. So they just have padding, full colon, right? And now specify the various dimensions. Automatically, the browser or actually the protocols that are going to understand that 5 pixels represent this dimension and so on. But for us to start with, we need to just write it full, padding top, then you specify that and specify the measurements or the dimensions, right? Now, that is for the padding, that the margin. Of course, you have also the borders, right? So the border also you can specify the various dimensions of the border, top width of the border, right width of the border. Yeah. Then you give those particular individual borders their respective dimensions. Now the key thing here is just to understand how to implement these kind of divisions. Yeah, how you divide the various dimensions using the padding, border, margins, right? So the shortest way is as shown. Maybe we can look at how this has been implemented using the padding, the margin, and the border. You can also bring on board the border style. Yeah, you can see there's a border style here showing if it's dotted. You can also have the border color. Now, selector, property, and the value should actually go in tandem. So don't fail to meet that particular structure. Yeah. Remember, we are building or discussing based on what we learned last time. Yeah. So don't think that we are starting from scratch. No, with most of these arrangements we already looked at in our last class. So if you happen to miss, kindly take note of that and look at your notes. So to implement this, as you can see now, we have our class CSS that is comprising of the padding. Yeah, so the padding is illustrated there with the various dimensions. We also have the margin, right? I can see the border. The border has solid dotted, right? And so this is specifying the width and the height, right? The width and the height, right? So this is what I really wanted you to take note. Look at the clock. Is it a clock or yes? If you want to implement using the shorthand form, yeah, to specify all these kind of dimensions, yeah, you can always use these. So you can always start from, it says from none going downwards. So this is how you can always implement. So top, then we have right, then we have bottom, then we have left. So it's like we go clockwise. So if you want to, like for example, have the dimensions for padding, you have to start with what? Top, dimension, go to the left, dimension. I mean, go to the right, not left. Sorry for that. You have to go to right, not left. Yeah? Right, then specify bottom. So using this particular clock, this arc here, it can always guide you. Yeah, so that you know that at this point I need to add, for example, I need to add the width, or I need to remove the height, and so on. I think it will make sense as we do maybe the exercises. I've actually shared, if you look at your Moodle, I think we need to have a lot of things done. So you need to check your Moodle and get the work going so that we implement this concept. There's step-by-step instruction on how you can always undertake this kind of exercise. So that is the box, or the CSS box model, that comprises the padding, the margin, and you can also have the border. Yeah. So how do you change the space around the text? How do you increase the margin around a particular content? And how do you define the border? All right. So let's look at the other. All right. So let's proceed, and talking about CSS. It's also important to introduce the concept of nesting and floating. Yeah. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what you need to understand is that we are introducing you to the very, very foundations of how you can come up with a particular website from scratch. Yeah. You are not actually, that's why we say that you're not going to learn any CMS, but you should be in a position to come up with your own CMS, like WordPress and so on. So we need to understand how whatever happens, or how these particular platforms are developed, right? So that's why we are taking you through this kind of concept, so that at least you have some understanding. Now, nesting and floating. We have already mentioned the div tags, and these div tags, we can really not implement them well, or the boxes for that matter. We cannot really have them positioned well if you don't have the nesting and the floating kind of concept. Nesting, as the name suggests, allows you to have different elements within or inside a particular element. As you say, a good example is the padding, the margins, and at the border. So we had maybe, for example, the padding being nested within the margin, or the border being nested within the padding being nested within the border being nested within the margin. So those kind of concept needs, we need to understand how we can always ensure that our space is properly utilized. Yeah, if it is 50 by 50%, is it centrally implemented, left side, right side, and so on. So here is going to allow us to position the different boxes or the div elements that you have seen into different places within the page. Like you can decide to have your footer at the bottom, yeah, make it float or have it at the bottom. We can float some on the left side and nest the different tags within those particular elements. So going forward, so as I mentioned, nesting mainly refers to nesting elements. So in real life, smaller boxes can be nested. I think that one already looked. Floating is essence, or is actually refers to causing elements such as the div containers to stay to the right. I think I've mentioned that, or left of the page, while other elements appear to that. So these are the concepts that allows you to properly position your different elements, or with respect to the boxes, position them at the different parts of the to the page, so that your page, if someone opens it, we can see that these are the menu part, the top menu bar. We can see these are the left menu bar, the footer, the header. So we can have the nesting and the floating concept, enabling us to have that. So example of nesting the div element, you can always have the various div elements specifying them being implemented within the within the style sheets that we have. Yeah, like we have these divs for the class that shows the yellow color. There's one that shows the blue color. There's one that shows the green color. So that is the nesting concept. Yeah. So yellow is nested inside the blue is nested inside the green, and green is nested wherever. Yeah. So the main thing here is to understand that this kind of arrangement is normally by default. But suppose, for instance, we want to separate, yeah, we want to separate or make yellow div to appear on the left side, maybe blue to appear at the center side, and green to appear maybe all over. Yeah. So that's the concept of what? Of floating. So we have placed a box yellow inside. Notice the comments and the final. Oh, anyway, there's some concept comment here to just help us understand the kind of div that we're dealing with. Yeah. So the div is nested. Yeah. We have nested every div inside the other. So yellow is inside, blue is outside, and green is outside. So remember how we specify the comments from a previous discussion. So this is what I was talking about, the need of floating. Yeah. So there's that default way that this kind of this kind of elements take shape. Yeah. So we can always try to have the floating so that they don't stack together by default the way they are doing. Yeah. So for us to ensure that maybe blue color or the blue div is moved away to the right side, we can have the floating. Yeah. Now these concepts are very, very important, so that as we maybe expose our web pages to the different browsers, we still retain the content. Yeah. And that's why the mobile, we have the mobiles and have the computer screens. Yeah. So that even if someone views, for example, your web page within your mobile, the content is really not distorted. Yeah? You can still use the floating elements to position, to readjust those particular contents, so that someone can, with any kind of device, can be able to view and see your contents. So this is how we do that. The float property. So the float property, we have, we also have the various, values that you can specify. You can specify float to the left, to the right, yeah. So if you want it to float anywhere, yeah, we can always specify that, right? So as you can see, we have the float property being introduced here, so that at least it allows us to move or separate the various div elements, right? So here we have two div elements. That one is specifying the green color or the green box. Yeah. Also take note of the class CSS that we're using that gives us the width of 120 pixels. So we are borrowing. You can say the div element has been integrated within the CSS. Yeah. And that's why we have this kind of shape or dimension, right? So we are told, although div is the most commonly floated element, other elements as well can be floated, like the image. You can present an image in a way that it floats, yeah, so that we don't really distort how that image looks like. So that's the float property. Take note of that. Yeah. So again, not only can we have the float property affecting, for example, the images or the boxes, but we can as well use the float property to affect the various elements, such as the paragraph. Yeah. So you just need to specify, yeah, the various div elements. Like let's say we have the float left, green, and also we have the various paragraphs, 1, 2, 3. Yeah? So how do you separate the various paragraphs by using the various, or how do you separate the various paragraphs the way they are shown, right? You can see they are wrapping, or they're not cascading, but after the first paragraph, there's a second paragraph, right? But if you want to introduce, or if you want to clear this kind of floating, yeah, we can use the clear property. As you can see at the bottom there, we can always separate, right? So the div element allows us also to reposition this or separate the various elements, maybe using the paragraph property, right? So it's very, very important for us to understand how these arrangements take shape so that you really don't get confused. Now, the clear float is part of the CSS, and you can see we have specified it as a class CSS. Then we have called, or we have actually, we have it within the div class, yeah, the clear float. So I believe by now you know how to relate the various CSS, the class, and I say that the class is what you're going to use mostly, rather than using the other one that you actually mentioned. Going forward, we can also separate. We can also separate the boxes using the float right, the float left. As you can see, we have the blue now clearly separated. Yeah, so we can assume even that the blue on the left, on the right side is our right sidebar, yeah, and the left one is the left sidebar. So we are now trying to ensure that this kind of floating takes shape, and you can see how we have separated them. Yeah, so to present a basic web layout using the floating and the nesting, you can see now the structure of our website, how we can have it, or the basic layout of our website using the float. Yeah? So you can see we have the header, we can float the header. Yeah, so you can see the header is there. So number one thing, maybe to remind you so that we don't lose track, you have to specify the CSS. Yeah, you have to mention the CSS that you're working, so that if you're introducing the div concept, you just pull, yeah, you pull the CSS. You mention the CSS that you're using. Is it header CSS? Is it the navigation, and so on. So you can see that's how simple we can always implement our the website structure. So now it's now you to go ahead and now specify the various menus and the various, and you can go ahead and head. Now remember, this is just a basic page, and that's what we are required at this particular point. So with more practice, you should be in a position to add more meat to this kind of skeleton structure that we are developing. All right. So still within the same concept of CSS, maybe just to wrap up and our understanding of how the CSS works, right? Let's look at other concepts that will allow us to understand CSS in details. So we can use CSS as you have seen to help us manage the layout of our various website pages, content. Yeah, we have seen how to nest the various div elements within using the CSS. Yeah, we can also apply the inheritance style. Now, CSS inheritance is rarely used, but it's very important. Like for example, if you have a parent CSS, like the font style, yeah, you can always just call that particular CSS style and replicate it within the other elements, right? So we can do a lot of things with CSS, like setting the background, right? So in this particular scenario, we have the image. We can specify the image of the background image of our website. Yeah, there are those websites that you can always have the background as the image. Now, take notice that be cautious with using images, because if you use a lot of images as your background, chances are they'll take time to load. Yeah. So I'll highly discourage you from using. But for our class purposes, let's see how we can use the CSS to have the image. So take note of the arrangement again. Yeah, you can see we have the selector, we have the property, and also now we have we don't have now the double quote here, but the single quote capturing the name of our image. So that's a good practice when you are really having your images included within the CSS. Yeah. Now, that happens to be a bigger image that covers the entire page, right? So suppose we have those particular smaller images that you want to use as your background. Now, one thing I also discourage you using these smaller images that keep on repeating. As you can see, it hinders or creates some kind of course, someone cannot be able to read your content, with these repeated kind of images. Yeah, so try to avoid them also. But the concept here is to understand how we can tie our images. Yeah, so if you are having a situation where you want to maybe decorate using some background images, and you have the very small images, we can use the tiling concept. Tiling, we can tile our images to appear horizontally. We can also tile our images to appear vertically. Or you can decide not to tile them at all so that they appear everywhere within the page. So let's see how we can implement this. So to tile these particular images, we introduce now the repeat property, yeah, so that you can control how these images repeat themselves. And also, before maybe we look at how to tell them, whether to tell them horizontally or vertically, take note of the repeat property. So repeat X, that one defines the horizontal. It specifies the horizontal arrangement, whereas the repeat Y specifies the vertical arrangement. And of course, the no repeat actually allows us not to have repeated images. Now, maybe we are going to look at how to use the textures. Yeah. Have you ever looked at some background of websites and you wonder how comes they have some very nice styles or texture background? Yeah, we can also use very small images, maybe like dots. Yeah, to make them repeat, so that someone cannot. Someone might feel that it is a full image, but they're just small images that have been repeated all over. So I think we are going to look at that concept, and that is the texture. So we can implement the tiling options as shown. Yeah, so take note of that. So this is what I was talking about, the background textures. So here's a situation whereby you want to ensure that your images are repeated seamlessly, yeah, so that they have some kind of feel. Yeah. So if you have some desire to represent your background in a different way, rather than using a full-blown image or a background color, it's always important to use this kind of texture options. So you can always use these repeated options for your as your background. So the concept is still the same. Yeah, you can always style them. Yeah, or you can tile them horizontally or vertically, as you're saying. Now, we can also have the fallback plan. Yeah. Now, I've said that sometimes the use of image as your background is not a good idea. Yeah, because they might fail to load as required. Yeah. So we must always have a fallback plan, and that is the color. You should have a background color that if in some cases your background, your background image does not appear, you can always represent that background in form of a color. So take note, the color of the background color should actually be almost similar to the image color that you are using. Yeah, so that at least the user or the audience doesn't have a feeling that maybe something is amiss. But always have that particular fallback plan of using the background color. And you have seen how to implement the color. So having this property, background color, you can use. And the other, of course, properties, as I mentioned, you need to have a look. I'd requested that you have a look at the W3 consortium website.org just to have some other additional materials that allows you to work on these particular properties. Yeah. So we have the font family, font size. Yeah. So these are kind of other additional elements that you can always use. But now with this one is with respect to how we can maybe adjust the links that you are using. Yeah. Now, how do you specify, for instance, the visited links, the unvisited links, or the links that maybe if you hover your mouse around them, how do they appear? Yeah. So we have already looked at how to specify the links using the A element or the anchor element in our respective discussions. So let's see how we can adjust the colors so that a user can always have a feel that this link has been visited. Now, the good thing is that by default, there is a way that the website or the browsers determines these colors for us. But it's always a good idea that we can also do it, that you can also adjust these particular colors. And that's what we refer to as the link sticks. Yeah. So the A link, that shows that is an unvisited link. Yeah, and that's always the default. The A visited, anchor visited, previously visited link. Hover shows when you are hovering your mouse. And of course, the active is when you have already clicked that particular link. So we can always adjust the colors based to maybe to our preference, right? So here's how we do that. Yeah, you can see the property, the anchor link. Yeah, the color property has been changed to blue to green. When you hover, it changes to orange, right? And also when it's active, you change color. Now, a question here, we need to actually represent or implement this link styling in this manner, starting from the link visited over active, right? So that we conform, yeah, to the HTML properties or how this HTML is implemented to work. Otherwise, if you rearrange that, chances are maybe the browser is not going to understand what you have already done. Again, also ensure that the space or the colon doesn't have or don't really create a space after the colon. So it's like a one thing, right? So that don't really affect how your link looks like. So we're just trying to learn more about how we can improve our links. Yeah, remember we had already seen how to create the different links. I don't know how many can recall the various links that we talked about, but yes, we have external links, internal links, those links that allows you to move to different areas within your page. Now, of course, I'd mentioned about the mobile compatibility aspect, whereby your content can be viewed the same way within different screens. Yeah, so we can always apply the concept of maybe the div and position them to the various parts. Yeah, so you can automatically position them to the right, to the left, and to the center. So that's something that you need to really understand. That it's not by default that once you create your content or the various paddings, that automatically is going to take a given shape. We have also seen how we can maybe nest the various elements. So with the div, we can also specify, like for the margin, we can set them to auto so that it automatically picks some given margin that you have specified, even the width, right? Yeah. So you can say there's a scale resolution here that you can always use, and that's what most web pages normally use. 1280 pixels by 720 pixels. Yeah. So you can use the auto, so that regardless of the screen resolution, we can always ensure that our content adjusts itself automatically. So take note of the auto property. Then we talked also about the comments. Yeah. Now, how you specify or implement comments within the HTML or XHTML tags is quite different with how you implement them within the CSS. Yeah. I don't know if you can recall how we capture the concept of CSS. The comments within the HTML tags. Yeah. So that one we use kind of less than, then some dots, and so on. But for the CSS comments, this is the structure that we use. So if you want to comment a particular area within the CSS, we / and the asterisk, and whatever appears within this particular, within these two / and asterisk, that is what is commented. Yeah. So the reason as why we can comment, as we had said, we know the value of comment. And like here, CSS comments are often used when experimenting with styles or troubleshooting problems. Yeah. It will always guide you in future what you are trying to create. Like for example, you had different divs nested together. You are using different properties. can always try to comment so that it guides you, right, on what you are trying to achieve at that particular time, right? So lastly, we looked at the selectors and our dimensions, the structure of the CSS, having selectors, properties, and so on. So there's a way that also we can have them, yeah, in a shorthand form, applying multiple selectors at the same time. So you can see instead of having all these on the left side, yeah, typing everything shown on the left side, we can just have them simply shown the way they are on the right side. Yeah. We just have to specify. Yeah. Like I can see, we have the class, right? We also have the other properties. Yeah. So to accommodate the multiple selectors, you only need to have a comma separating them so that you can always use the shorthand option. Now, I think that will mark to some extent the far we can learn about CSS at this given time. So I just need you to implement whatever we have learned. I know I have captured only a few things, but in real sense, if we go overboard, you can miss some given stuff. So try to do the assignments or the exercises that I've done so that you enforce these given concepts that you have already learned. Now, maybe before we move to the next thing, let's see how we can identify the various special characters. Yeah, how we can implement the various special characters within your website. Yeah, like if you want to create, like for example, the copyright symbols. So how do you go about that? So that's what we need to understand. Yeah, so special characters is very, very important when you integrate them within your website. Yeah, so that at least instead of using multiple or different text, you can always just apply those kind of special characters. They are very, very important, right? So I know you know what special characters are. Give you an example of using maybe the copyright symbol, right? So there are several situations in which you must use special characters in building an XHTML page. Like for example, displaying characters on the page that are part of the XML markup syntax, showing characters that are not on the standard keyboard, right? Like the copyright, right? Of course, showing consecutive space characters. Yeah. Like for example, if you want to create some spaces between, for example, different elements within your within the content, you can always have these characters, right? So, like for example, to create space, let me just minimize this one. So to create space, you can use this special character. The non-breaking space, this one, you have the ampersand, then the NBA space that allows you to have what? To create a space between content within your website. Also, we have the quotation mark, rarely used, but it's important that you have it because you can always have it from your keyboard, but that's how you specify it. We also have the ampersand being captured like that, and also you have the less than. So these are some of the special characters that you might find. Important, or someone might ask you how you can implement them within the website. So a special way of implementing them, or an example of how you can implement these characters, as you can see, we can create space. So the first line there's a space between spaces and right. Yeah? So the more you have this NBA space and breaking space, the more you have them, the more space you create. You can see also how the apostrophe has been implemented, right? You can see also the ampersand, how it has been implemented. Yeah. So it's important to understand how to have these special characters. Yeah. Of course, the use of quote is not required, right? Because you can always use the other option. Other ways of having or displaying the special characters, yeah, you can see. Yeah. So the HTML code is what you're likely to be using most of the time. Yeah. So some look a bit complicated. Yeah. Anyway, it's good to actually understand how to create like a diamond sign. How do you code it? It's a good practice, a good thing that you can uh, have. Yeah, so that's how it is implemented within your web page. Yeah. The special characters. You can think of other special characters and maybe ask yourself how you implement them. I think the other one that is mostly used is the superscript and subscript characters, and that is how you implement them. You can see how superscript ensures that the character is actually appears, I think, above the line, and subscript appears below the character line and so on. I think you can see how it has been implemented. That is, we can go on and on talking about these different characters. So they're there. You can always look at other additional characters that you can talk about. All right. I think I don't have much to say unless you have a question. So this one just wraps up the concept. This is just an additional, the concept of the CSS. So kindly proceed to the module. I use the remaining thing to do the exercise. I've even shown you how you're going to get the marks so that it guides you. In case you have a problem, you can always feel free to ask. Yes, there's a question.
Yeah, can we do the classwork and still post it on module?
I'm not getting you. That is Alfred.
Yeah, no, it's clear for you.